Hello again. Welcome to BAI, the Soulcast. This is episode 7. We're going to focus in on lost and found, a theme that comes up in this week's Parashat Ki Tetzei. A little bit of full disclosure. This is Rabbi David, by the way. That's part 1 of the full disclosure. Part 2 is that Ki Tetzei is my bar mitzvah parsha. We don't have to talk about how many years ago, but it is a parsha that is chock full of commandments, of laws, of really important and interesting material. According to most medieval accountings of all of the mitzvot, of all of the commandments in the Torah, 72 of the total of 613 are to be found in Parashat Ki Tetzei. It's a lot of mitzvot. Of those 72, one of the better known is known in Hebrew as Hashavat Avedah, the return of lost items, lost objects. The way that mitzvah is described in the Torah itself is rooted in the reality of ancient life. Here's Deuteronomy's passage. If you see your fellow's ox or sheep gone astray, do not ignore it. You must take it back to your fellow. If your fellow does not live near you, or you do not know who he is, you shall bring it home, and it shall remain with you until your fellow claims it. Then you shall give it back to him. You shall do the same with his ass, you shall do the same with his garment, and so too shall you do with anything that your fellow loses and you find. You must not remain indifferent. Twice in that passage, the Torah uses that phrase about not remaining indifferent. Do not ignore it, it said in verse 1 in the first clause of the whole passage. And it concludes again with that same phrase, that same idea. Lo tuchal hit'alem. You must not remain indifferent. The examples given in the Torah make sense given the reality of life in ancient Israel. A lost object was likely to be an animal, an ox, a sheep, an ass. But it could also be a garment. Those are the items that people owned, that people had. And what the Torah calls upon us to do is to take care of that animal or that item until the one who has lost it claims it. And once that happens, the mandate is, you shall give it back. Deuteronomy's statement of this law is actually building on an earlier statement. And that statement appears in the book of Exodus. Bible scholars refer to it as the basic law, and it goes like this. When you encounter your enemy's ox or ass wandering, you must take it back to him. Hashev tishivenu lo. You have to return the lost object. The likelihood is that Deuteronomy's expansion or elaboration, in fact, serves to answer questions that must have arisen about implementing it. So, for example, what if the owner is distant or unknown? It's a question that perhaps really arose. Or does the law apply only to the animals named? And in Exodus, those animals are an ox or an ass. Or to other animals, maybe to inanimate objects as well. The very earliest time and the very earliest layer, the Torah is already commenting on itself, interpreting itself, and expanding this category, this idea that one must return lost objects to their original owner. The early rabbis of the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries of the Common Era expand the idea even further. An entire chapter of the Mishnah is devoted to this question of how to understand the obligation to return lost objects. The Mishnah begins with its own question: which found objects belong to the finder, and which must be proclaimed? And in its treatment of the question, the Mishnah raises a whole series of added considerations. What are the identifying marks on that object that would ensure that the one seeking it, who has lost it, is in fact the owner? This notion, too, that there needs to be a proclamation of some kind, an announcement: I have found X or Y. If it belongs to you, come and retrieve it. And finally, the rabbis introduce an idea that I think is really interesting and also really important. They describe the possibility that after losing an item or an object, the owner will actually come to despair that she will never see that object again. They call that despair yeush, and they also describe its opposite, which is tikva, hope. My friend Rabbi Danny Nevins, Dean of the Rabbinical School at JTS, makes a lovely suggestion about yeush. It's onomatopoetic, he suggests. Yeush is the sound a person makes when exhaling with despair, metaphorically releasing their last hope in a literal release of breath, rushing past clenched teeth. Rabbi Nevins pushes even a bit farther in the realm of abstraction of this mitzvah, of this concept of hashavat aveda. Lost property, he writes, is a concrete concept that is amenable to abstraction. And then he offers an application that I also want to share with you. The most valuable property of the Jewish people, he suggests, is the Torah itself. It belongs to all of us, but it is nevertheless a lost inheritance for most Jews. A story in the Midrash about a rabbi named Yanai makes that point precisely, and teaches that if you meet a Jew who knows nothing of the tradition, don't mock that person, but become her or his teacher. Even the ancient rabbis knew and recognized Jews who had lost the Torah, and recognized, too, that it was their obligation to return it to them. In the more modern era, the Hasidic writer, the Sfas Emes, 19th century Gerer Rabbi, actually claims that every day there's a heavenly voice that announces, fulfilling the halachic obligation to proclaim a lost object, announces that a valuable lost object, namely the Torah, has been found and is waiting to be claimed. My friend Rabbi Tamar Elad Applebaum, founding rabbi of Tzion in Jerusalem, and not too long ago, our special guest at Beth Am Israel via Zoom, writes as well about this notion of the lost articles of our lives. And whether you agree or not that the Torah is lost, or that many of us have lost it, I think we can all agree that there's so much in our lives that feels lost right now in this very complicated and very challenging time. Rabbi Tamar writes about a place in Jerusalem that was called Even To'en, the stone of claims. And anyone who lost an article would go there. Anyone who found a lost article would also go there. One stands and announces, the other stands and gives identifying marks and reclaims. At the Even To'en, losers and finders stand side by side. And both have a responsibility. It is the responsibility of losers to lay claim to their lost object. It is the responsibility of finders to announce that they have found something that doesn't belong to them. They both meet at the stone, writes Rabbi Tamar, and from this mountain go forth so many and such great personal, national, and spiritual finds and losses for many religions and peoples. So the further abstraction of this concept of lost objects is to really focus on things that we lose and have lost in our lives. We as individuals, we as a people, we as a nation, we as spiritual beings. Loss, in the simplest of terms, is part of life. Also part of life is the hope of restoration, the hope of finding again that which has been lost. Time for some music. Sam Cooke's classic, Bring It On Home to Me. There are so many great covers of Sam Cooke's song, and I had a hard time deciding which version to share with you. The original speaks for itself, but I also want to share with you this beautiful version, Otis Redding and Carla Thomas, the Memphis sound. Same song, a little bit of a different feel. Enjoy. I want to take you back to Rabbi Tamar's comments about Hashavat Avedah. She expands even a bit farther and makes the suggestion that one of the losses of our time and of our moment is the loss of the Shekhinah herself, of the divine presence. She cites the words in the Siddur, repeated 3 times a day, in which we praise God who machazir Shechinato l'Tzion, who returns the Shekhinah, the divine presence, to Zion. It's a really rich and powerful thought that part of our work in the world is to actually return to ourselves, to our communities, to our places and spaces, the divine presence itself, herself. Whether that place is Zion or Penn Valley, wherever it may be, returning the divine presence is the job of this moment, maybe the job of all moments. In the midst of a global pandemic, we have lost so much. So many lives, loved ones, but also in this moment in time, it feels like we have lost more as well. Sense of dignity and certainty and security. A sense of wellness and confidence in our place in the world. A great deal of loss all around. How do we work to restore that which we have lost? How do we work to bring the Shekhinah, the divine presence, back into our midst, back into our lives? That, I want to suggest, is the challenge that really lies before us. And to remind you again of those original words in the book of Deuteronomy, in the Torah, in Parashat Ki Tetzei, Lo tuchal hit'alem. You can't ignore it. You can't look the other way. We can't really just say, oh well, things are lost, they're lost, let's move on. That's our task right now. This moment, this season, this time. To not look away. To account for and identify that which has been lost. To seek to restore as much as possible the divine presence, our dignity, our sense of confidence, our sense of goodness in our place and at this time. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. I've got a bunch more music to share with you. Ended up finding lots of things that I thought would fit into this discussion. Just 2 of them, though, to leave you with. One is a great Israeli song called Kama Tov Shabata Habaita. How great that you have come home. It is Shalom Chanoch's song, but it's performed here by Shalom Chanoch and Shlomo Artzi, 2 of the great Israeli singer-songwriters of our time. And finally, Rhiannon Giddens, and I've shared with you some of her music already in weeks prior. This is a piece that she recorded with Yo-Yo Ma, and it is a reflection on building a home. Enjoy both, and hope to see you again next week. Thanks for being here.
כמה טוב שבאת הביתה, כמה טוב לראות אותך שוב. ספר מה נשמע, ספר איך היה, למה לא שלחת גלויה, לא שלחת גלויה. כמה טוב שבאת הביתה, קצת רזה, טוב אך מה זה חשוב. עשית חיים, ראית דברים, ראית קצת דברים אחרים, ראית קצת דברים אחרים, דברים אחרים. כמה שטוב אתה כאן, כמה שטוב אתה כבר כאן, כאן.
כמה טוב שבאת הביתה, בית זה אומר כבר הכל, הכל. היה לך חם, היה לך קר, עכשיו אתה יותר מאושר, קצת יותר מאושר. כמה טוב שבאת הביתה, כן, כאילו שיצאת רק אתמול. הכל בו נשאר אותו הדבר, אתה עכשיו יותר מבוגר, אתה עכשיו יותר מבוגר, קצת יותר מבוגר.
כמה שטוב אתה כאן, כמה שטוב אתה כבר כאן,
כן, כן,
כאן. אז כמה טוב שבאת הביתה, באמת, תגיד חשבת עליי. כמה טוב שבאת הביתה, כמה טוב שבאת אליי, כמה טוב שבאת אליי, חזרת אליי. אתם יכולים לשיר איתה? כמה שטוב אתה כאן,
כמה טוב שאתם כאן, תודה שבאתם.
כמה שטוב אתה כבר כאן,
באת הביתה.
brought me here to build your house, build your house, build your house. You brought me here, build your house and grow your garden fine. I laid the brick and built your house, built your house, built your house. I laid the brick and built your house, raised the plants so high. And when you had the house and land, the house and land, the house and land, and when you had the house and land, then you told me go. I found a place to build my house, build my house, build my house. I found a place, build my house, since I couldn't go back home. You said I couldn't build a house, build a house, build a house. You said I couldn't build a house, so you burnt it down. So then I traveled far and wide, far and wide, far and wide, and then I traveled far and wide until I found a home. I learned your words and wrote a song, wrote a song, wrote a song. I learned your words and wrote a song to put my story down. But then you came and took my song, took my song, took my song. But then you came and took my song, claimed it for your own. I took my bucket, lowered it down, lowered it down, lowered it down. I took my bucket,